Razör Force, if you haven't heard, allow me to be the first to bear the badass news. After a grueling 13 years slaving away in the Squeenix salt mines, a single sale later, and Eidos, and more importantly, Deus Ex and Thief, are finally free!
I asked for this.
To understand why my fellow millennial mongoloids greeted this news in much the same fashion as when we learned Rebecca Romijn was no longer squatting on Stamos' dick, you first have to understand the import of the franchise in question. To the uninitiated, or those who haven't watched any of my Deus Ex reviews, first of all, fuck off, go watch them, and second, put it this way. You know all those rambling proctonauts who pinch out 7-hour video documentaries about how Metal Gear Solid 2 was designed by Jesus, directed by God, and descended from the heavens flanked by bare-assed angels riding a chocolate waterfall? Or how Kojimbo predicted the future because memes, conspiracies, and breaking the fourth fucking wall? Yeah. Deus Ex did that at least an entire year earlier, and also happened to have infinitely better gameplay.
You know, we're not just making an arcade game where you play the radar and call it stealth. Play the radar. Play the radar.
Did you like it?
And incidentally, fuck those videos and the fleet of talentless twinks that generate them. If I needed an autistic essay, I'll volunteer at a special needs class in Tijuana. After the end of Eidos and the implosion of Ion Storm, Deus Ex found itself owned by a new incarnation of Eidos based out of France's little embarrassment, Quebec. Eidos Montreal hit the grindstone hard on what would become Deus Ex Human Revolution, a spectacular reboot that sadly Square Enix swooped in at the 11th hour and bought. And for but a brief moment, we allowed ourselves to hope. Sure, Squeenix had been milking Final Fantasy for 17,000 subpar entries by then. Sure, they financially subsisted solely on Pocky and Weeb ejaculate. But hey, they left well enough alone on Deus Ex, so with a fresh new reboot of the greatest stealth series of all time, Thief, we would doubtless see a sequel to Square's laissez-faire management approach and deference to Western design ethos, right? Right?
Wrong.
I think it's safe to say that we struggled from the starting point. We asked ourselves a lot of questions. Is the camera first or third person? How much? Again, it's a game a decade old, which was completely revolutionized the stealth game. But here we were in 2009-ish, 8, 9. How is stealth selling? Is it sustainable for sales? What is the right balance between stealth and non-stealth combat, hacking or pickpocketing, sorry? And I mean, we got a sub 70 Metacritic. I've completed the game several times, and I personally, I'll speak to my own name, and I think the game wasn't missing that much to be a great game.
To cut a long story fucking Fuentes, whereas Deus Ex Human Revolution had excelled in the absence of Japanese managerial meddling, 2014's Thief
You are Master Thief.
devoured dizzying quantities of dick. Worse still, Squeenix seemed to interpret its monumental failure, along with more minor underperformances such as the Tomb Raider reboot, sequels, and Hitman Abomination, as an indication they should actually micromanage even fucking harder. And so Square slammed the accelerator on Deus Ex Mankind Divided for a thankfully aborted attempt to nickel and dime the Deus Ex faithful with online play and, believe it or not, motherfucking microtransactions. Mercifully, these attempts were ultimately aborted, but not in time to stop dipshits like Dim Sterling from getting peanut butter in their bussy about it and sicken their terrible taste-having fans on the game that, frankly, deserved infinitely better than it received at release. Mankind Divided has aged outlandishly well, which is more than I can say for that autistic asteroid. In the aftermath of the AstroTurfed outrage, Deus Ex was quietly retired, and Eidos Montreal were assigned to do a small amount of development on the awful Avengers game, and the far fucking better Guardians of the Galaxy, the latter of which was successful, but not so successful as to dissuade Square Enix from selling they asses. Weird, when Final Fantasy XIV bombed so bad it had to be remade, Square were all but anxious to piss their money away. When Final Fantasy XV took over a decade to make, it had to be scrapped at least twice, only to underperform at launch, I don't recall any talk of selling Square's stake in the fucking Final Fantasy franchise. Look, the simple fact is Square Enix made a pioneering move in acquiring Western studios in 2009, particularly as the Japanese industry happened to be imploding at the time. But Square wouldn't know what to do with a Western developer even if they essentially ran themselves, which ironically is basically what Eidos Montreal was already trying to fucking do till you snatched failure from the jaws of success.
I think the outsider's perspective on Western versus Eastern Square is I think people project that there must be a lot of frustration with the Western developers because you look at a game like Final Fantasy 15, which was originally Versus 13, being worked on for 10 years, and then you get so many stories about like, oh, the Western games didn't quite live up to expectations. It feels like they are on different planets. They're on different timetables and levels of crunch and pressure. Is that a fair read on it? Is that inaccurate to have that view?
I think so. I think you're very close to my opinion.
The oblivious managerial motherfuckers at Square Enix would rather lose billions in Japan in a market that, with the notable exception of Nintendo, has contracted for much of the past 20 fucking years, than make millions in America. If that don't tell you these cats were more out of their league than Logan Paul fighting someone his own age, I don't know what will. Enter Embracer, a massive but thank Christ decentralized collective of gaming publishers and devs allowed their autonomy and inner culture, who acquired Square's share in all these Eidos properties for all of $300 million fucking pocket lint. Square lost twice that on Final Fantasy 14 and fucking 15's launches alone, and it says an awful lot about how much they value these storied franchises that they'd essentially sell them for spare change. As for Embracer, their opening statement was beyond encouraging, explicitly promising a new Tomb Raider title, tellingly right before they mentioned Deus Ex and Thief. But oh, Razor Force, cling to your cocks, because they then went out of their way to mention, wait for it, Legacy of fucking Kain in the self-same press release. The first time this title has been uttered by anyone in any official capacity since Squeenix sank their teeth into Eidos to begin with. But with fervent hope for the future of my favorite series, I prefer to travel the high road and end on a conciliatory note. Look, Squeenix, you weren't all that bad. Just fucking mostly. Sure, you fucked up, Thief, ignored Legacy of Kain and turned Tomb Raider into a clone of a Tomb Raider clone, but you did fund the final year of development on Deus Ex 3, and that game still goddamn rules. So, as Squeenix sails back to the rising sun to micromanage the merry fuck out of their own aging franchises, all eyes fall to Embracer, and whichever one of the myriad publishing houses under their umbrella will be overseeing Deus Ex 5. Because Embracer, I love you and I'm gonna let you finish, but if you bury these franchises any deeper in the Earth's core than they already are, I will go off like Randy Johnson in an aviary. I'm Razor Fist, God fucking speed.
I crash the chance of finding make you feel your body.
Okay, today, I just have one thing to say.
You're fired. You're fired. You're fired.
You're fired.
You're fired. You also are fired.